Hello, listeners. Welcome to season 2 of the Masters Decoded podcast. I am Manish Merchant, the chief decoder. I want to thank you for the overwhelming response to season 1. Your feedback and encouragement led me to bring you season 2 of the Masters Decoded. The season will tap into how technology, artificial intelligence, and other socioeconomic factors have impacted my guests' careers or passions. My next guest on today's podcast is Vandana Bhatnagar. Vandana is currently serving as the Chief Program Officer for the National Skill Development Corporation of India. Before this role, she was associated with World Bank, focusing on national development programs that have significantly impacted the country's development. An MBA from IIM Calcutta, her career has been an inspiring journey. Listen in further to hear her unveil the journey. Hi, Vandana. Welcome to Masters Decoded podcast series. Really glad to have you.
Thanks, Anis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Vandana, when I looked at your profile and the association which you are part of, which is the National Skill Development Corporation, and candidly, I was not aware of the association, but when I read through it, uh, I was completely awed by the impact the organization is creating. So, you want to share a little bit about what does NSDC do and what's your role in that?
Sure. I think, some people may not be aware of what NSDC does. And when they do discover, then they are quite pleasantly surprised. And many times when they've visited our office, they're even more pleasantly surprised. So just to give a quick sense of what NSDC, it's a public-private partnership. It was created by the government along with industry associations about 10 years back. And its primary role is really to bring in the private sector to facilitate skill development that's better aligned with what the market requirements are. Mm-hmm. So it was really created with the intention of bringing in a more market aligned skilling ecosystem and leveraging the private sector's capacities to deliver that. So over the years, we've created a fairly robust ecosystem, which is currently we have about over 700 training partners who have trainings of various kinds, ranging from basic training for blue, gray collar kind of job roles, right up to very high level IT, financial services, medical services kind of job roles. And we have also created industry bodies who are acting like the nodal point for each sector. So there are 37 sector skill councils. So through this entire ecosystem, we have trainings of various kinds, close to 4 to 5 million trainings or people get impacted with these various kinds of programs. Some are market based where people are paying for it, some are government funded. And my role really is to provide kind of an oversight function and coordinate these programs that are running through our partners. Currently, I'm focusing more on the programs which are run under government programs and with some of the industry partners. And we also, I kind of coordinate the kind of quality standards, quality assurance systems that we are introducing and requiring our partners to follow. So that's broadly what I do. And we have now recently seen a huge ramp up in some of the digital initiatives as well. So that's the new area that the teams that I coordinate with are focusing on as we go forward.
It's a pretty large endeavor because you have, it's not pertaining to a particular state or a city or a area of a skill. It's national skill on a country which is 1.4 billion people. It's not a small endeavor. And just want to pick your brains and get your perspective. The industry is evolving, India is evolving, the skill requirements are evolving. Uh, where do you see a lot of interest because you all are impacting many people through this initiative? What are you did speak about digital, but what skills are becoming more prominent, which is being an ask of the industry as well as a focus from NSDC side?
Yeah. So you see, there's no India, as you're saying, is a very diverse country. So really, there's no single answer to that because it depends also on the segments that you look at. But I mean, if you look at, for example, the blue and gray collar segments, there's a lot of focus currently on logistics, on healthcare services, on even apparel. These sectors are seeing a lot of traction for those roles.
Hmm.
And but if we look at some of the roles which are relevant for, say, college students and postgraduates, clearly, as we all know, future skills are becoming very, very important. Data analytics and machine learning skills, mobile application development. These are kind of cutting across sectors, across geographies, across sectors. But if we even look at sectorally, then while we have these sectors like healthcare, etc., but if I were to just look at, say, a 3, 4 year time horizon, some of the sectors which are, I would club them as the creator economy, the nurturing economy, the green economy. These are going to really ramp up. So when we're
Hmm.
saying creator economy, we're looking at things like content creation, looking at media, a lot of things like you're seeing the amount of activity on YouTube, people creating their own channels, and a lot of emphasis on content ramping up and using new technologies, including AR, VR. And then, of course, in the nurture economy, the health sector is seeing an extremely large demand. And that's not just, medical personnel, but even things like health-related IT, the kind of customer interface, administrative services, all of which are going towards supporting the health services. And then you have, of course, things like education, which is edtech is growing really fast. So these are things where we are seeing a lot of growth and demand. But across the board, if you look at it, the future skills that I mentioned are going to be equally applicable everywhere. In fact, Internshala, in one of their surveys and studies, said digital marketing, web and mobile app development are some of the top profiles. And we know that anybody who has done data analytics has good skills in it, enjoys a salary premium, a definite salary premium. So those are the kind of things which I would imagine people are needing to acquire their skills on to remain in demand.
You mentioned a very interesting perspective, the creator economy, the nurturing economy, and the green economy. But today, that specific economy is largely in the urban cities in tier one, tier two, and tier three as well. But if you look at the grassroots,
Yeah.
what I would call as the rural side of India, how is your role focused on uplifting that aspect as well? Because digital marketing, content creation, technology is still not reaching those parts of India yet. So how is NSDC focusing on that part and your role?
Well, it's a tough one. And if I were to really dumb it down, sometimes when I have to explain, what we have in the country is a difficult transition we are doing, where we have an overwhelmingly large portion of our working age population who have been traditionally engaged in agriculture,
Yep.
but they are moving out of it. So if you look at the younger people who come from, say, agricultural families, most of them do not wish to continue to be in that sector. Um,
Hmm.
but and so a lot of them are trying to move out into, let's call it old Bharat, into India. And within
Yep.
India, you have the low skill India, which is the blue gray collar kind of economy. You have the delivery boys, you have the housekeeping staff, security guards, construction workers, largely more urban or peri-urban expansions happening. So they're transitioning into those areas. And the ones who have better education or the ones who are in the low skill India but are wanting to move up are moving into aspirational India, which is again what I mentioned earlier. But there is another segment, which is the new Bharat, which is where one hopes there will be an opportunity that will expand, which is where new agricultural techniques, agrotech, as you know, is seeing a huge amount of
Yep.
action in terms of startups. E-commerce is expanding rapidly into tier 3, 4, 5 towns and rural areas as well. Fintech is expanding. Healthcare extension services is expanding. So the new Bharat will also see a lot of opportunities. It's still early days to make a strong pitch, but there are pockets in the country where there is a demand, and even renewables. Look at the kind of need in solar. So there are opportunities that are coming up. We are working wherever there is traction. One of the things that NSDC has to actually keep in mind is that skilling has to be, as far as possible, linked to where there is high probability of a job. We need to do trainings which will result in a relatively high probability of getting into a job. So doing it prematurely before there is readiness in the sector to absorb manpower results in a frustration for the student. So that's what we do. But we do have, even in those segments, a lot of work happening. The other quick thing is that in agriculture, a lot of people are not that ready to do 3 month, 4 month programs.
Yep.
So we have short upskilling modules linked to formal certification, which are run in about a week or 5 days, so that people don't have to stop working. They get a bit of exposure, then go back to what they are doing otherwise. So that's something which I think, hopefully, but frankly, many other programs are there which NSDC doesn't directly run, which are also targeting the rural areas. So we are not the only player in this.
Yep. Talking about you, bringing the focus back on you, Vandana. If I look at your impact and in the last 6 years or 5 years, you've been associated with NSDC, but prior to that, you also took on a massive role working with the World Bank on water sanitization program. And I was just thinking, like today, the typical Indian thought about roti, kapda, makan, which is the basic food, basic necessities. Water is the basic necessity. And I would love to understand, what was that role all about? Because that also had, I'm sure, had a massive impact on what you were trying to focus on.
Yes, so actually, that was an extremely interesting journey in my professional life. And water sector is really one of those sectors which is so very central to any human society.
Yeah.
But it is also one of the more intractable challenges. And in Indian context, a little more so. So it's a combination of ideological positions linked to water, resource constraints linked to water, capacity issues to ensure that you can provide water services. So if we look at what I was doing and the kind of programs that we were running, many times people jump into the story on technology. How do we get the right technology to make water available? But actually, the bigger challenge is in institutions that are obliged to make that water service available to the citizen. So, as we used to say, that our endeavor was to not fix the pipes so much as to fix the institutions that fix the pipes. Because you can have the most elaborate treatment plant, you can set up pipelines, but finally, to get that water coming out of the tap requires a lot more. What the incentives are, what are the financial models which are running that institution, what is the capacity. So, we were working on interventions to address the institutional challenges in the water service providing departments or institutions that we have in our country. And both from the side of engaging with governments, which are, of course, finally going to take those decisions to address those challenges. But on the other side, also to create greater understanding amongst the external stakeholders on what it takes to get water which is high quality and at the right price and predictable. So it was both from an advocacy of external stakeholders as well as the government partners. And it was a fascinating journey, many highs, many frustrating moments, um,
Mm.
but a lot of learning. And we worked with the national government counterparts, with state governments in select states, and in many cases, some of the local governments as well, municipal bodies. My role was more related to urban water supply. Prior to that, I was also working on solid waste management, which is another big challenge in our country. So, I mean, maybe we can chat later down this conversation as to what my lessons were after moving from the corporate sector into the development sector. But it was interesting.
So talking about the corporate experience, it's an interesting transitions you've had in your career. You started with Standard Charter way back, uh,
which was in the finance. You did work with TRI, which is the Tata Research Institute, and you went back into finance and then went into some consulting and infrastructure, and then you went to the development side of the nation. Uh, how did this career span out, and how, you know, your initial years of work experience, how did it help what you are doing currently today, as well as when you look back, are those decisions all lining up today?
Yeah, so actually, to be honest, it wasn't by design. And clearly, seeing my professional journey, it definitely couldn't have been by design. So I think, I kind of went along with my professional journey. I started, in Standard Chartered, which was a natural kind of choice after an, MBA time. And it was an extremely valuable experience. But after a point of working and learning, I realized that that's not the kind of professional journey I could imagine myself in the long term. It was something which gave me a lot of professional expertise in many areas and domains. But in terms of motivation, of what gives me a kick at the end of the day after a day's job, that really wasn't it. So people who were in it, I had seen, had maybe who were 5, 6 years after, beyond what my experience was. I couldn't relate to that, professional trajectory. And on the side, I had been very interested in environmental related issues and had friends who were in that domain. I was almost looking at doing a second master's in environmental economics.
Wow.
But then this opportunity of working with Terry came along. It was a huge leap in the dark. And to be honest, when I took it up, I said, I'll give it a year. If it doesn't work for me, I'll try and hop back. And somehow I stayed around for 4 years there. It was a big shift because from the corporate sector to not for profit, many
Hmm.
different things you have to adapt to apart from financial changes. But it was enormously interesting because I was pretty much learning on the go. I hadn't got a degree in environmental studies, so I was having to self-learn as I went along, and I was working on a project which was trying to bring in environmental risk analyses and kind of metricizing corporate performance on environmental aspects. And
Wow.
coming from a financial background, I was interested to see if it were metricized, can environmental risk become one of the attributes that corporates are assessed on when they are being financed?
Wow.
So it was trying to embed environment into decision making. So that was a very useful learning experience since I had to do a lot of learning. After 7 years of working, suddenly I was at ground zero, a lot of humility also. But it was very useful. And after that, IDFC was something which just came along, and I went into IDFC thinking it was a natural extension. But as it happened, I had to leave relatively soon after because I landed up with, conceiving twins, and I
Wow.
realized that I would not be able to do justice to the role or my personal situation, and I had medical issues. So basically, I took a short break, and while I was on a break, and I decided after a year or two to try some short consulting work, the possibilities came up with the World Bank as a consultant. So I kind of, transitioned in
Hmm.
manner which was just very organic. And I just kept my mind open. And as the opportunity presented with itself, I said, why not? And it evolved. So I transitioned as a consultant, and then after a while, they asked me to come on board as a full-time resource, and that's how I stayed with the World Bank for a while. And after I'd been at the World Bank for about 9 years plus, this opportunity in National Skill Development Corporation came up. It was a complete sector change. So
Wow.
I was fairly wary of that. But again, I was interested in trying something new before I drew a close to my career. I didn't want to be staying in the World Bank forever. Um, so actually, what motivated me to join there was something that NSDC does, which is called the World Skill Competition, which is a global competition. I'm glad you know about it. So,
Mhm.
and we were hosting the India Skills part of it to identify the India team. And the CEO who had been asking me to come on board, he said, "Why don't you go and see that?" So I went to Pragati Maidan, and I was so astounded with the sheer energy there and the youth who were there, and just the
Yep.
can-do spirit which was there, coming from very, very humble backgrounds. People were really pitching hard to make it at the top. So it kind of was very exciting, and I kind of joined NSDC. But what's been interesting is it's all stitched together really at the end without it being planned, because I landed up handling a funding portfolio at NSDC. Um,
Okay.
and a lot of so the funding portfolio bit, I drew upon my banking experience. And the institutional side, frankly, there were a lot of synergies with the institutional challenges and issues I'd seen in the earlier sector. So I could draw upon that also to understand what kind of challenges and interventions could be relevant for skill development. So yes, it's stitched together. And since NSDC works with NGOs, corporates, and the government, my experience in all three is there. So I can engage with these stakeholders fairly easily, and understand where they come from. So that's basically what my journey has been.
It's pretty inspirational, Vandana, because for me as a listener, uh, by the way, before I go ahead and share some thoughts, because you spoke about twins, are they identical, completely identical twins, or they are?
No, they're not identical. They're fraternal twins. They're two girls, and they started college last year. So in
Great.
the midst of the pandemic.
I'll just share a trivia. I'm married to a twin as well, one of
Oh
them.
my!
Yes, and the other twin, which is a girl as well, is married to my younger brother. So it's
Oh my! That's incredible.
yeah, that is
Are they
because
hopefully not identical? Are they?
they are identical.
Oh my! That's interesting.
It is. So, but as they say, twins may not have twins. So my wife and me don't have twins. So it's a very rare case a twin may have a twin, but our sons are not twins, or my brother's daughters are not twins. But
Yeah,
anyways, so just wanted to share that. Uh,
wonderful.
but talking about your career again, I think you spoke about you taking a break because you had children, and a lot of women have to go through the same process, and reinitiating their careers after they have taken some may get maternity leaves and they may come back, but they have lost that time in corporate side. And we are seeing a lot of conversation today in India and globally about this phase. How do we support women? How do we support people who go through these transitions, and maybe men as well? Today we do see men also taking sabbatical because they may become at-home dads rather than women taking that. But it's not a big phenomena yet. We do see women still sacrificing, I will use that word, in their career. So from your perspective, and especially when it comes to NSDC, how and gender diversity is also a big conversation today, which is, and especially women in tech is also a big conversation. How do you, in your current role, you're trying to facilitate, because you yourself have experienced it?
So, you see, the interventions that we have under the government programs is where we can influence this to some extent. The programs which are run under the market-funded programs, we do not impose anything from our side on this. Of course, we track the metrics, but we cannot influence their choices, because that then questions the model that they are working with. But on the government programming, which we do, the interesting thing is that despite us not mandating anything, 50% of the candidates which were trained under the national government program called Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana (PMKVY), 50% were women.
Wow.
And it wasn't something that we mandated. It wasn't something that we incentivized, but that was the mix that we landed up with. But underlying that, there is a bit of a skew in the sense that if we look at which sectors most of these women have been trained, they tend to be more on the traditional sectors that we would see women in, which is in beauty healthcare and apparel, to some extent in healthcare as well. So basically, there is a sectoral bias on where
Mhm.
we have more women, but there is a definitely strong presence even in other sectors. So what we see is, you see that the effort on the part of the training providers is to mobilize candidates who show interest. A lot of women who were basically homemakers have gone into some of these traditional training programs in beauty or apparel and started something in their homes.
Mm.
So it gave them an opportunity to get started. And I'm here now talking not really about the graduates as yet. I'm talking about the women who are from weaker education backgrounds. So I think the advantage of the government program for them was it was free. So even if a family was reluctant to invest anything for a woman to get skilled, she could get going in these programs. So I think they definitely gave opportunity and a break, and we have enormous number of such stories, individual stories on how the training gave them a leg up to move ahead. Having
Okay.
said, even from areas like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, I have seen women coming from rural areas, tribal areas, with absolutely amazing amount of motivation and drive to break out and take the challenge of roles outside their geographies, even outside the country. I interacted with a woman who was a young married woman who came from the village, took her husband into the city for the training program, and said, I'm going into this. It was a residential training program in a technical role. And
Wow.
she was planning to go to the Middle East for project work, though she had no experience at all of living outside. But that fire was there. I've met a girl who fasted in Karnataka to allow her parents to go into a program in Bangalore, which was residential. So, it's more about giving that opportunity to the women who are interested so that they can make that first step within whatever is their ability. Some might not be able to make such drastic steps. Some will be saying, let me work, do something from my home. And the same is true for now in the graduate segment. And the interesting thing is, at an overall scheme level, it's not just the mix that we have 50%, but the absentee rate is lower for women, their pass rate is better than men, and their placement rate is even higher. But
Wow.
salary levels tend to be about 15% less. Um, so, you see, from our side, we've basically provided an opportunity nearer to their homes. And that is an opportunity if women have been able to make that first step from their side, they've been able to build on it and go ahead with it. So that's what our effort has been. And there are several centers which are only for women. Also, we have made an effort across some of our model training centers to provide facilities like creches so that even young mothers can come and get themselves upskilled. But going forward, I think things like the gig economy, work from home, all those things will hopefully provide a lot more ability for women to stay connected in their workplace, and professional women, for sure, I think will be enabled because many of them take that break because they struggle to be away from home when they have young children. So that's, I think, where we are. But in India, it's a very long road ahead. We have had an abysmally low level of labor force participation by women. It's under 24% now, and that's very worrying. So we do have.
No, and I agree. I think it's a joint effort. One association, one body cannot do it. It's fixing those grassroots issues also. I had recently participated in a research report where I said it needs to start at a very young age for families where they have daughters at home who can be educated. Parents need to be educated, not the daughters, on how to make them independent rather than they should get married, they should be learning to cook. Those are good practices both boys and girls should learn, but it's not just that they are only made for home. So I think it needs a more grassroots fix rather than a other fixes.
One of the things we've heard also is that it's not just about the skills and jobs. Other things need to come together, like safe transportation,
Yep.
safe working place environment. All of those will influence the decision of women to go out and work in an external workplace. If we don't have those, dots lined up and connected, it'll the chain breaks down somewhere. Yeah.
In your role, it is just fascinating the kind of impact, whether it is current NSDC or at World Bank or previously as well, with Terry as well, with Tata Research. Uh, have there been any moments which are memorable, which, are something which you really remember and smile or have a great fond memory of?
Well, there have been several. So I think at the World Bank, we had worked a lot on something which was, carried forward by me, which another colleague had started. But we managed to take it up to a fairly successful culmination, which was related to really performance monitoring of urban services. And it's a huge challenge because government bodies being amenable to performance monitoring is not the easiest thing to. And the effort was something which was a coordinated, effort. It's called service level benchmarks. So over about 2 years, we worked on creating a agreed framework along with the ministry led by the joint secretary of the time. But we created a coalition of development partners because it was not something that one organization, even World Bank by itself, could do. So it was a partners coalition, and we worked with about 25, I think, cities, if I remember right, which did that pilot exercise, and we worked with the local counterparts to come up with the data. Had a big workshop, huge amount of energy got generated, and it was very well received. And finally, it got even embedded in the Finance Commission report, 13th Finance Commission report, which was a big achievement for us at the time,
Wow.
because getting it institutionalized. Of course, it then did flounder after a few years because these projects need continued support. The other thing, which was an extension of this, which was uh, doing citizen feedback surveys. We made an extension of this exercise where we said it's not enough that the service providers report what they do, but we need to hear what citizens say is the performance looking like from their point of view. So
Hmm.
if the city is saying I'm delivering water for say 6 hours, but if the citizen is getting for 1 hour, there's a huge disconnect. So we wanted to capture what the services look like from the citizens' feedback point of view. So we did this massive exercise called SLB Connect, Service Level Benchmarks Connect, which captured with service feedback from people in a geotagged map what the service picture looked like for cities. We did that in 9 cities. And it used technology, it used, feet on the ground, but the conversion of data into an analyzed output was very rapid. And that got picked up as an approach by what you might have seen called Swachh Sarvekshan,
Yep.
which is an annual exercise that the Ministry of Urban Development does, because they had been pondering on how do we monitor services and capture this quickly for 900, sorry, about all the cities in the country, and they didn't know how to do it. When we demonstrated this approach, they said, "Okay, let's try and scale this and use technology for that." So in that, they picked up our systems, adapted it to their requirement, and within about, I think, 2 weeks or so, they managed to get data and process it for 70 cities.
Wow.
And they kept expanding it to 300 plus cities and more. Now it's an institutionalized exercise. Of course, there are a lot of criticisms on the metrics they use, but it includes a feedback component from citizens where you call in and give feedback. So these are things, which you feel happy about, which one has contributed in one's own small way to taking that little needle, forward. Of course, lots more to be done, but these were some of my high points at the World Bank.
That's amazing, Vandana. There are only few people who get a chance to make a national impact, an impact which is larger for the society than, bringing in more revenue or saving margins. So I think that's an interesting perspective. Uh, Learning from your own career, if you have to share perspectives to the listeners, men and women, if they are thinking about developing their careers, like you've taken on leap of faith on joining industries which you were completely not aware of. you know there is a lot of conversations, fake it till you make it, but you didn't fake it, you actually went in it. You said yes before even knowing about it, and then you started learning something better at it, getting better. And this is what even Sir Richard Branson talks about: say yes even if you don't know, and then learn on the job. And you've done that. So what's your perspective or feedback or recommendations to people who are building careers?
So, today's time is completely different from where we began our careers from. I shouldn't say we, you're much younger. But
No, few years difference, but no.
One of the things which I struggled with in the beginning, which today is far less difficult, is that there is so much knowledge available on the internet at the tap of your finger. So even if you want to jump sectors, it's way more easy today than it used to be. So you don't have to fake too long, to be honest. You can get, the key, I think, and I would probably put it down to is three things. And today, the world is extremely unpredictable. And also, careers are going to be very, very unpredictable. And like we've seen for many other things, it's an era of mass customization from a time of
Yeah.
mass standardization. We're moving to mass customization, and it'll be the same for professions. We can't follow and mimic existing templates. So I think it's very important that the youth start their experiential journey of discovering themselves early and on what interests them, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. And that happens only when one engages in various kinds of work environments or projects or activities of any kind, but to develop those skills which are needed to know what are my core strengths. And today, the expectation is when a person, even as a college graduate, is arriving with way more skills today than what we entered the work life with, even after a postgraduate. So the expectation is that apart from discovering and knowing yourself, that you should be able to develop yourself. And that's something which becomes completely, I think, critical, that people need to learn how to learn. And that I feel, to be honest, in schools, they need to start kids and make it mandatory to do one learning module themselves, say an
Yeah.
online course, so that you learn how to find out what do I want to learn, how do I go and stick it out through that learning journey on my own without a teacher or somebody pushing me. So I think that first is discover, the second is developing yourself. And today, even with CVs, I look for whether there was any self learning that the person has done. It shows me that do they have a learning mindset? And are they willing to adapt and learn? Because even today, if I hire somebody, 2 years later, their job might look very different because of the changing demands. And the third is, and I see this from what I've observed from my children's generation, and I see with young colleagues, it's a difficult and complex world. You have too many options, choices. There's too much chatter and noise all around. So I think it's important that we learn to discipline ourselves, which means knowing and having a routine for one's own well-being,
Hmm.
uh, physical and mental health. I've seen way too many young people, kind of getting into difficult situations. So while we navigate today's world, I think very early in life, one needs to develop and create one's own discipline and routine of anchoring oneself and rebooting one's own self. So both, and I'd say rather three Ds, and sorry for sounding gimmicky, but
No.
it's discover yourself early, keep discovering. It'll be a constant process. I've discovered things about myself through my work experience which I never thought I had when I began work life. And second is developing yourself constantly. And the third, I would say, is discipline. Learn the art of discipline. That would be, to me, three most important things. And then if there are people who are wanting to explore the development sector, which is where I am,
Hmm.
it's an extremely exciting sector, but it's very diverse. You can be a grassroots kind of person. You could be a more institutional kind of person, which is what something like the World Bank or other Gates Foundation, etc., to manage large programs. You could be a social entrepreneur, which is a different kind of model. So there are many models, and one needs to be willing to explore those spaces and figure out what works for you. Because not all of these will be compatible with one's personal work style. And I think the part which is very different in the development sector is it's way more fuzzy. So while there are very inspiring big goals that you're pitching at, there are very few variables that are in your control, unlike in a private business.
Yeah.
Uh, you have to be willing to have the patience to work through the process. Huge amount of advocacy effort needed, stakeholder management. So one needs to now be having that humility and patience to work through the journey in the development sector. So highs, a lot of highs, but also a lot of lows and frustrating moments. So that's, I think, to me, what I would like to say to the people around.
No, on that note, Vandana, I really love the discover, develop, and discipline. And your point about people need to know how to learn and keep learning throughout their career. It's a very important and relevant conversation today. You know, people used to talk about T-shaped skills. Today it is key shape, like the key. And that's an interesting perspective and how you talk about keep learning. And I really love the 3D framework which you have shared with the listeners. I know you are super busy. You have a lot of responsibilities apart from personal life, from keeping the nation's skills developed. So I don't want to take much of your time today, but thank you for spending this close to an hour with us on today's podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Anis. It was my pleasure. And all the best for your podcast. It's a very fascinating theme you picked up. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening in. And we close yet another episode of Masters Decoded. If you've enjoyed the episode, please you can help us out by sharing it on social media. I would personally appreciate that. It's how we can reach more listeners, and the more listeners we have, the more awesome guests I can get in touch and convince to participate in these conversations that are a joy to have for me, and I hope they are a joy for you to listen as well. You can also help a lot leaving reviews on iTunes or your podcast service of choice. Reviews are surprisingly helpful in supporting the podcast to get to more listeners. If this episode has intrigued you, I would request you to subscribe to the podcast to stay up to date and get notified to the future episodes. With that, I bid you and see you in the next episode.